Bureaucrats who designed interstellar military outposts apparently believed that throwing together a dozen incompatible species in a confined metal structure would somehow result in efficient cooperation rather than the spectacular organisational disaster that any reasonable person might predict. Nexus Station orbited the disputed Helix Nebula like a monument to optimistic thinking, its sprawling corridors echoing with the sounds of beings who had mastered faster than light travel, but still couldn't figure out how to schedule a meeting that didn't devolve into territorial posturing. The station buzzed with the peculiar energy of beings who had mastered faster than light travel, but still couldn't figure out how to make coffee that didn't taste like recycled atmosphere. In the tactical briefing room, Wren Hawthorne sat with a sort of rigid posture that suggested she was either extremely professional or desperately trying not to let her anxiety show. Spoiler alert, it was both. Her fingers drummed a nervous rhythm against her datapad while she reviewed the mission parameters for what had to be the 15th time in the past hour. The other species in the room had taken notice of this particular human quirk with the kind of scientific fascination usually reserved for watching primitive organisms attempt basic functions. "Look at the little mammal twitch," rumbled Axon Helix, his 4 arms crossed in what passed for amusement among the Vorthak. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous plating that could deflect small arms fire, Axon represented everything the Galactic military loved about non-human species. Impressive, intimidating, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. Do all humans perform these delightful anxiety rituals before simple reconnaissance missions? The crystalline entity known as Prism shifted with the sound of wind chimes caught in a hurricane, their translucent form refracting the briefing room's harsh lighting into rainbow patterns across the walls. The human stress response appears particularly pronounced in this specimen, they observed, with the clinical detachment of someone who had never experienced a single moment of genuine fear in their existence. Perhaps we should request a more stable representative for critical operations. Wren's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on her datapad. She'd learned early in her career that responding to these provocations only provided more entertainment for species who found human emotional displays endlessly amusing. Instead, she highlighted another section of the geological survey from Obsidian 7. Noting the unusual mineral compositions and atmospheric readings that had her tactical instincts screaming warnings into the void. Commander Vex Thornfield, one of the few other humans in the room, cleared his throat with the authority of someone who had spent years learning to project confidence he didn't always feel. Agent Hawthorne's caution has served us well in previous operations, he said, though his tone suggested he was getting tired of defending his species' apparent neuroses. Her threat assessment protocols have identified 17 potential security risks that other teams missed. 17 imaginary threats, corrected Razak the Bladeborn, his reptilian features twisted into what might charitably be called a smile. The saurian scales gleamed under the artificial lighting, each one a testament to evolutionary perfection in the art of looking dangerous while saying stupid things. Your species sees predators in every shadow because you evolved as prey animals. We evolved as apex hunters. There is a difference. The irony of a species that had never left their home system until 3 centuries ago, lecturing humans about evolution, was not lost on Wren, but she filed that observation away for later use. Right now, She had bigger concerns than wounded pride. The mining teams on Obsidian 7 went silent 6 days ago, she said, finally looking up from her data pad to address the room. 17 separate facilities spread across 3 continents, all stopped transmitting within a 12-hour window. That's not equipment failure. That's coordination. Omen Void Strider materialized more fully into the visible spectrum, his ethereal form solidifying just enough to project the appropriate level of condescension. The telepathic species had mastered the art of looking smugly superior, even when they resembled nothing more than organised mist or with delusions of grandeur. Or it demonstrates the fragility of primitive technology, he suggested, his voice carrying the mental equivalent of a patronising pat on the head. Not every disappearance requires elaborate conspiracy theories. Elaborate conspiracy theories, Wren repeated, her voice flat. Like the theory that 17 separate mining operations, each equipped with redundant communication systems and emergency protocols, would all simultaneously experience identical technical failures. Stranger things have happened, Axon rumbled, though he couldn't actually provide any examples when pressed. Your species' tendency to anthropomorphize random events into deliberate patterns is well documented. You see intelligence and malice where others see simple misfortune. Dr. Iris Caldwell, seated 2 chairs down from Wren, finally spoke up with the weary tone of someone who had spent too many years translating human concerns into language that other species might actually consider worth hearing. The preliminary atmospheric readings show elevated levels of iron oxide particulates, she said, consulting her own notes. Combined with unusual electromagnetic interference patterns, it suggests either massive industrial activity or significant geological instability. Or both, Wren added quietly. The mining reports mentioned finding chambers that weren't on any geological survey. Empty spaces, big ones. Prism chimed with what passed for laughter. Among their kind. Empty spaces. How delightfully ominous. Perhaps we should be concerned about the monster under the bed as well. The room filled with the various species' equivalents of laughter, chittering, harmonizing, and what sounded suspiciously like static electricity having a good time. Wren felt her cheeks warm with the familiar burn of humiliation, but she pressed on anyway, because someone had to be the adult in the room. I'm recommending a full tactical sweep before we establish a base camp, she said, her voice steady despite the chorus of alien amusement. Automated reconnaissance drones, perimeter sensors, and a graduated approach to facility investigation. A graduated approach, Axon repeated, savouring the words like fine wine. How wonderfully human. Why take direct action when you can spend weeks preparing for problems that exist only in your primitive imagination? Commander Thornfield shifted uncomfortably in his chair, caught between supporting his analyst and maintaining credibility with the Galactic military hierarchy. Perhaps a modified approach would be more efficient, he suggested, the diplomatic equivalent of throwing Wren under the transport shuttle. We'll establish a base camp and begin facility investigations immediately. Standard security protocols should be sufficient. Wren opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She'd learned that pushing too hard only reinforced their perception of humans as anxious, paranoid creatures who jumped at shadows. Instead, she made a few quiet notes on her datapad and began calculating how long it would take to say, "I told you so," once everything went sideways. The briefing continued with a sort of military efficiency that looked impressive on paper, but had all the tactical sophistication of a particularly aggressive sneeze. Assignments were distributed, equipment was allocated, and confidence was expressed in quantities that would have impressed a used hovercar salesman. Through it all, Wren sat quietly and watched her fellow team members plan their way into what her every instinct screamed was a carefully baited trap. As the meeting concluded and the various species filed out with their characteristic displays of superiority, Wren remained seated, staring at the holographic display of Obsidian 7. The planet hung in the projection like a grey-brown marble, its surface scarred by mining operations and atmospheric processing facilities. It looked harmless enough, if you ignored the 17 missing crews and the steadily growing list of anomalies that everyone else seemed determined to dismiss as coincidence. "Still seeing monsters in the shadows?" Dr. Caldwell asked, pausing beside Wren's chair. "The shadows are what worry me," Wren replied, not taking her eyes off the hologram. "It's what might be hiding in them." Iris studied her colleague for a moment, then nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think your caution is justified. But you know how this works. We're the new species. We have to prove ourselves. By getting our people killed. By not being the ones who cry wolf." Iris gathered her materials and headed for the door, pausing just before she reached it. "Pack extra sensors. The unofficial kind." Wren allowed herself a small smile as she watched the xenobiologist leave. At least one person on this mission retained some vestige of common sense. Now she just had to figure out how to keep everyone alive long enough to prove that sometimes paranoia was just another word for paying attention. Obsidian 7 greeted their arrival with all the warmth and hospitality of a funeral parlour during a plague outbreak. The planet's surface stretched beneath their descending transport like a study in industrial depression. Its grey-brown terrain punctuated by the skeletal remains of mining facilities that stood empty as monuments to someone else's very bad day. The atmospheric readings painted a picture of a world that had been thoroughly violated by progress, then abandoned when progress apparently decided it had better things to do elsewhere. Wren pressed her face against the transport's viewport, her tactical scanner painting targeting reticles over anything that registered as structurally significant, which, unfortunately, wasn't much. The mining complex designated as Primary Site Alpha looked like someone had taken a thriving industrial operation and subjected it to the sort of rigorous abandonment that suggested either very bad planning or very good reasons to leave in a hurry. "Cheerful place," muttered Mace Ironhold, the Terran security chief, whose idea of small talk usually involved discussing ammunition loads and backup extraction protocols. His scarred face reflected the viewport's pale light as he studied the approaching landing zone with the expression of someone who had learned to mistrust anything that looked too quiet. "Reminds me of my ex-wife's cooking." Commander Thornfield activated the transport's external sensors, flooding the cabin with readouts that managed to be both reassuringly detailed and utterly useless at the same time. "Atmospheric composition nominal for human habitation," he announced with the confidence of someone reading from a script. "No immediate biological hazards detected. Surface temperature holding steady at -12 Celsius. "No immediate biological hazards," Wren repeated, her voice carrying just enough skepticism to make the nearby aliens shift with amusement. How thoroughly did these sensors search? Because I'm getting electromagnetic interference patterns that suggest either massive underground activity or the world's most ambitious geological survey. Axon Helix stretched his forearms in what passed for casual dismissal among his kind, the gesture causing his chitinous plates to rattle like armour in a windstorm. Human paranoia remains consistent across operational environments, he observed to Prism, who chimed their crystalline equivalent of agreement. Perhaps your species developed anxiety as an evolutionary advantage when facing extinction-level stupidity. The transport touched down with the sort of mechanical precision that suggested their pilot either knew their business or had gotten extremely lucky with their career choices. Through the viewports, the abandoned mining complex loomed like a collection of geometric shadows against the planet's pale, overcast sky. Nothing moved among the structures, except the occasional drift of metallic dust, caught by the planet's perpetual wind. Echo Brightwater, the communications officer, whose perpetual optimism usually annoyed Wren, but now seemed oddly comforting, activated her equipment arrays with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed technology could solve any problem that didn't involve actual thinking. "Scanning for transmissions across all known frequencies," she announced. "If anyone's still broadcasting, we'll find them." "And if they're not broadcasting?" Wren asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Then they're probably fine," Razak the Bladeborn declared, with the sort of confidence that could only come from a species that had never encountered a problem they couldn't solve by applying sufficient violence. "Communication equipment fails. Mining teams find alternative methods of completing their objectives. Your species assumes catastrophe, where more advanced civilizations recognize simple adaptation." Wren bit back her immediate response, which would have involved several anatomically improbable suggestions regarding Razak's evolutionary heritage. Instead, she checked her personal scanner and noted the complete absence of human signature bioelectric fields within a 20-kilometre radius. 17 mining teams, each consisting of between 12 and 30 personnel, and not a single heartbeat registering on equipment sensitive enough to detect individual cellular activity. The landing ramp descended with a hydraulic wheeze that sounded suspiciously like the station expressing its opinion about their current situation. The away team filed out onto Obsidian 7's surface, their boots crunching against soil that had been processed, refined, and abandoned with the efficiency that only large-scale industrial operations could achieve. Dr. Caldwell immediately began taking atmospheric readings, while muttering things that probably weren't compliments about the planet's mineral composition. Her portable laboratory hummed and clicked as it analysed soil samples, the results painting a picture of a world that had been systematically strip-mined for rare metals and then left to contemplate its significantly reduced circumstances. "Interesting," she said, studying her scanner's display with the expression of someone who had discovered something that didn't quite fit the expected pattern. "The soil composition shows recent disturbance, but not from mining equipment. Something else has been excavating." "Define something else," Commander Thornfield requested, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to hear the answer. Iris consulted her readings again, her frown deepening. "The excavation patterns are organic, deliberate, and extensive. Someone or something has been digging through the abandoned facilities, following specific pathways through the underground tunnel networks. Omen. Void Strider materialized more fully into the visible spectrum, his ethereal form solidifying enough to project the appropriate level of dismissive superiority. Scavengers, he announced, with the certainty of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved. By assuming the universe operated according to his personal convenience. Local fauna adapting to utilize abandoned structures. Hardly unprecedented. Local fauna, Wren repeated, consulting her own geological surveys. On a planet with no indigenous animal life larger than bacterial colonies. The team pressed deeper into the mining complex, their footsteps echoing through corridors that still held the lingering scent of human habitation mixed with something else, something organic and predatory that made Wren's tactical instincts start broadcasting warnings at maximum volume. The facility's emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, creating the sort of atmosphere that suggested either dramatic tension or severe electrical problems. Cobalt 9, the synthetic analytical unit, whose idea of personality involves stating obvious facts with mechanical precision, paused beside a section of corridor wall that showed clear signs of structural damage. Analysis indicates deliberate modification of facility architecture, the android announced. Corridors have been widened, ceiling height increased, and support structures reinforced beyond original specifications. Modified by whom? Mace asked, though he was already checking his weapon's charge levels with the practiced efficiency of someone who expected to need them soon. Unknown, Cobalt 9 replied, with a sort of unhelpful precision that made conversations with synthetic beings such delightful exercises in frustration. Modifications appear designed to accommodate larger forms than standard human dimensions. Wren felt the familiar chill of confirmation settling over her, like a particularly unwelcome blanket. Every instinct she possessed was screaming warnings about this place, but she was surrounded by beings who had decided that human intuition ranked somewhere below random chance in terms of tactical reliability. They found the first signs of actual struggle near what had been the facility's central communications hub. Furniture lay scattered in patterns that suggested either very poor housekeeping or the sort of violent disagreement that typically left permanent impressions on both participants and surrounding architecture. But significantly, there were no bodies. Equipment damage is consistent with emergency evacuation procedures, Prism observed, their crystalline form refracting the emergency lighting into rainbow patterns across the walls. Personnel likely received sufficient warning to abandon their positions in organised fashion. Organised fashion, Wren muttered, kneeling beside what looked suspiciously like claw marks scored deep into the metal flooring. These evacuation procedures, sir? Did they typically involve ripping through reinforced hull plating with their fingernails? The marks were deep, deliberate, and far too large to have been made by any known mining equipment. Whatever had created them possessed both the strength to tear through starship-grade materials and the intelligence to do so with surgical precision. The scratches formed patterns. Not random destruction, but purposeful modification of the facility's structure. As the team spread out to investigate the remaining sections of the complex, Wren found herself gravitating toward the facility's security office. If anyone had recorded what happened here, this would be where she'd find the evidence. The office door had been ripped off its hinges with the sort of casual efficiency that suggested whoever had done it viewed reinforced security barriers as minor inconveniences rather than serious obstacles. Inside, the security monitors lay dark and lifeless, their screens spiderwebbed with stress fractures, but the main recording unit appeared intact, its memory cores sealed behind layers of protective housing that had somehow survived whatever had demolished the rest of the facility. She was just connecting her portable interface when a sound echoed through the complex. Something between a whistle and a growl, carrying harmonics that seemed designed to trigger every prey instinct evolution had ever developed. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the facility's corridors with acoustic shadows that made her skin crawl. In the sudden silence that followed, Wren could hear her own heartbeat hammering against her ribs like an engine trying to achieve escape velocity. Somewhere in the facility's depths, something large was moving through the modified corridors with the sort of predatory patience that suggested it knew exactly where its prey was located. The hunt, she realized with crystalline clarity, had already begun. The security recording flickered to life with the sort of digital clarity that made bad news look absolutely pristine. Wren watched 17 different camera feeds showing the mining facility's final hours, each screen telling the same story with the methodical precision of a disaster documentary nobody wanted to produce. The predator moved through the corridors like liquid shadow given predatory intent, its form shifting between the cameras in ways that suggested either advanced stealth technology or an understanding of architectural blind spots that would have impressed a professional assassin. When it finally resolved into clear view, Wren felt her tactical training collide headfirst with evolutionary terror. The creature stood nearly 12 feet tall, its chitinous hide gleaming with the sort of organic perfection that suggested millions of years spent perfecting the art of efficient killing. 4 arms ended in claws, designed for both delicate manipulation and enthusiastic dismemberment, while its elongated skull housed sensory organs that tracked heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, and probably the existential despair of its prey. "Fascinating specimen," Dr. Caldwell whispered, studying the recording over Wren's shoulder. "Apex predator development with clear signs of tool use and strategic planning. Notice how it disables communications first, then systematically isolates individual prey groups." On screen, the mining teams realized their situation with the sort of dawning horror typically reserved for tax audits and family reunions. They scattered according to emergency protocols that had clearly been designed by someone who had never encountered a predator capable of thinking 3 moves ahead. The creature hunted with methodical patience, driving its prey through predetermined routes toward prepared killing grounds. It displayed an understanding of human psychology that suggested either extensive study or the sort of natural talent that made certain species exceptionally good at turning other species into lunch. "Where did it come from?" Wren asked, though she suspected the answer wouldn't improve her day significantly. The recording showed the predator emerging from excavated tunnels that connected to cave systems far beneath the mining complex. Deep, ancient chambers that geological surveys had somehow missed, as if the planet itself had been keeping secrets about its more dangerous residents. A new sound echoed through the facility, closer this time, carrying harmonics of anticipation and hunger. Through the corridors came the measured footsteps of something large, moving with predatory confidence toward their location. The creature had been studying them since they arrived, Wren realized, learning their patterns, analyzing their weaknesses, preparing to add another species to its collection of successful hunts. And judging by the approaching footsteps, class was now in session. The predator materialized in the facility's main corridor with the sort of dramatic timing that suggested either excellent theatrical instincts or a deep appreciation for psychological warfare. Axon Helix, who had spent the entire mission explaining human evolutionary inadequacies to anyone within earshot, discovered that 4 arms and chitinous plating provided surprisingly little comfort when facing something that viewed his entire species as an interesting appetizer. "Contact protocols," he managed to stammer, raising his weapons with hands that trembled despite millions of years of supposed evolutionary superiority. "We should attempt communication." The predator tilted its elongated skull, with the sort of curiosity typically reserved for examining particularly fascinating insects, before deciding whether they were worth the effort of proper dissection. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed designed to resonate directly with the fear centers of every known sentient species. "Communication," it repeated, the word rolling through multiple vocal chambers, like expensive wine being savoured by a connoisseur. How delightfully civilized. Most species begin with weapons fire and territorial displays, but you wish to negotiate. Prism's crystalline form had lost most of its usual refracted brilliance, dimming to the sort of pale luminescence typically associated with imminent system failure or existential terror. "We represent the Galactic Military Coalition," they managed. "Our disappearance will trigger immediate investigation protocols." "Will it?" The predator moved closer, each step calculated to maximize the psychological impact of its presence. "I have been collecting such investigations for some time now. The hegemony sent their finest warriors. The consortium dispatched their most advanced tactical units. Each group arrived convinced of their species' natural superiority. Razak the Bladeborn, whose entire identity revolved around being evolution's answer to combat effectiveness, found himself backing toward the facility's rear exit with movements that suggested his lizard brain had finally overruled his ego. "What do you want?" he hissed. "Want?" The predator's attention shifted, scanning the remaining team members with sensory organs that catalogued everything from heart rates to biochemical stress signatures. "I am conducting research, comparative analysis of species adaptation under extreme survival pressure. Most prove disappointing." Its gaze settled on Wren, who had spent the entire encounter calculating sight lines, escape routes, and the probable effectiveness of various improvised weapons against chitinous hide. Unlike her colleagues, she hadn't bothered with diplomacy or threats. She had simply prepared to survive. "Interesting," the predator murmured, moving closer to examine her with the sort of scientific fascination usually reserved for discovering new forms of life. "You display none of the typical behavioural patterns. No territorial posturing. No appeals to authority. No assumption of a species' superiority." It leaned down until its skull was level with hers, close enough that she could see her reflection in its multifaceted sensory organs. "Tell me, small hunter, what designation do your kind use for you?" "Wren," she replied, her voice steady despite every survival instinct screaming at her to run. "Wren," the predator repeated, testing the sound. And your companions mock your caution, do they not? They dismiss your warnings as primitive fear responses. The silence that followed carried weight that seemed to compress the very atmosphere around them. Is that, the predator asked with something approaching respect, the one they call paranoid? The creature straightened, its attention shifting to the cowering aliens who had spent days explaining human inadequacy. Your species survived because you never stopped being prey, it observed, almost conversational now. While others evolved past their survival instincts, humans refined them into art. Wren felt a smile tugging at her lips despite the circumstances. Sometimes, she reflected, being right was worth the terror.